Welcome everybody this evening to our latest ECHA pilgrimage talk. Just before we start and I introduce Dr. Bailey, I'll just tell you about one or two things that are going on at the moment or coming up in the next few weeks and months. In addition to this evening's talk, we have our annual general meeting on Saturday, 28th of October. This is going to be at the Loyola Room at the Catholic Church of the Immaculate Conception, Farm Street, Mayfair, London, W1. And at 2 o'clock, we have our annual general meeting with Joanna Bogle giving a talk, 2:30, I think. And at 3:30, a tour of the church by Father Paul Nicholson, SJ. So three things are going on: the annual general meeting, the talk at 2:30 and 3:30 tour of the church, and 4 o'clock as well, viewing of archives as well. So it's not always open to the public, so the archives of the Jesuits of Farm Street will be open. So that should be really interesting, especially if you're interested in research on Jesuit history, for example, in this country. That's register via Eventbrite as usual. We're asking for a donation of between £5 and £10 if possible for this event to cover costs and things like that, because there's always costs involved with these things. Friday, 3rd of November, we've got I'm doing a talk in Lewes in Sussex called No Popery, KNOW, How Catholic Recusant Women and Their Families Survived Persecution of Elizabeth I. So that's Friday, 3rd of November, 7 p.m, St. Pancras Church, Ireland Lane, Lewes, East Sussex. 21st of November, we've got a talk by Linda Porter, one of the greatest and most illustrious princesses in the world. That's not Linda Porter, by the way. That's Catherine of Braganza we're going to be talking about, in case you're wondering. Tuesday, 5th of December, we've got Ian Styler, who's here this evening, I believe. I can see his name up there, so you can no doubt hear it. So he's going to talk on St. Ethelthryth of Ely, otherwise known as St. Etheldreda. And that should be an interesting talk. One of the articles I published in the newsletter is on her, a very important Anglo-Saxon saint and a member of the royal family at the time. So that should be a really interesting talk. Tuesday, 16th of January, we've got Josh Madrid, English Catholics in the Second World War, and so on. There's more talks as well going on in February, March, April, and so on. So right up to goodness knows when, September by the look of it. In August next year, we've got Professor Mark Stoyle on the prayer book Rebellion of 1549, and I'm particularly interested in that. I've just ordered his book, and I'm doing some research on the Oxfordshire Rising at the minute. Anyway, I'm going to introduce you to Anne Bailey, Dr. Anne Bailey. If you'd like to put any comments or questions into the chat box, it's open there for you to do so if you want during the talk. So Dr. Bailey is an expert on pilgrimage. She's associate member of the history faculty of Oxford University, and she teaches in the continuing education courses on, for example, ancient and modern pilgrimage, and she's an expert on medieval women and pilgrimage as well, which she might mention this evening. So we can't see Anne, unfortunately, with some hiccup with the camera, but we can see the PowerPoint, so that's quite good. So Anne, very welcome to our talk this evening.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm so sorry you can't see me, but I'll sort of just carry on with the talk and hope you enjoy it. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint, everybody? Yep. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so on the evening of the 12th of September, the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, gave a talk at Carlisle Cathedral. Oh. And now the PowerPoint isn't moving. I'm going to stop sharing it and share it again. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. All right. That's better. Sorry about that, everybody. The Archbishop of York, his talk was entitled "Things I Learned on a Very Long Walk." The Archbishop enthused about a pilgrimage he'd been on in 2016. This was Camino del Norte, one of the many routes known collectively as the Camino de Santiago. Like the other Caminos, it finishes at the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela in Spain, the third most important pilgrimage destination in the Middle Ages. As the talk progressed, it became clear that for the Anglican Archbishop, pilgrimage was all about the journey. It was the act of walking with its stripped back simplicity, its reliance on the hospitality of strangers, and the companionship found along the way, which spoke to him about the true meaning of pilgrimage. Curiously, not one word was said about his destination, the shrine of St. James. His audience would be excused for wondering whether he'd ever made it to the end. Stephen Cottrell is just one of many Anglican clergy to take up pilgrimage walking and to see the journey as its main purpose. And it's not, of course, a viewpoint limited to the Church of England. Ever since the Brazilian novelist Paulo Coelho published his esoteric story of a journey along the Camino, also ignoring the destination, that the idea of pilgrimage as pedestrian travel has become increasingly common. The association of pilgrimage with walking was recently brought home to me from the reaction I had from friends wanting to know where my next pilgrimage would take me, and I replied, Lord. This is greeted with looks of blank incomprehension, then embarrassed confusion, closely followed by the dawning realization that the Marian shrine in France does actually count as a pilgrimage. Lourdes, of course, ranks as one of the world's top Christian pilgrimage destinations, but because it doesn't involve a long, challenging walk, it barely registers as such outside the Catholic community. Religious knowledge, it seems, is being eroded by popular culture, which supposes that a Camino-type journey is the only way of doing pilgrimage. So, while pilgrimage is undergoing a remarkable resurgence, is often perceived in a very narrow way. And this extends to the history of pilgrimage. For as well as dismissing pilgrimages which fail to conform to the Camino archetype, people often project their own ideas about pilgrimage back into the past and make mistaken assumptions about the medieval practice. A good example of this is the assertion found, for example, in a Times article, Chaucer's pilgrims walked to Canterbury. In case there's any doubt, Chaucer tells us that his pilgrims rode on horseback. And this wasn't a literary fiction. As I'll discuss later, most medieval pilgrims only travelled by foot if there was no alternative. Like today's Catholics at Lourdes, walking to a shrine was an integral to the pilgrimage experience in the Middle Ages. So, does this mean that Stephen Cottrell was wrong in assigning so much importance to the journey and the act of walking? Well, no. What is little understood about pilgrimage is that there's no particular right or wrong way to do it, because pilgrimage isn't a uniform practice. It means different things to different people, and this is true even within the Christian tradition. As we'll see, the Archbishop's very Anglican idea of pilgrimage both reflects contemporary cultural trends while also being firmly rooted in Protestant history. So these are points I will return to later. But first, I'd like to take you back in time to the Middle Ages and to the Christian beginnings, the phenomena we now know as pilgrimage. What did it mean to go on pilgrimage in the Middle Ages? Today, the idea of medieval pilgrimage tends to conjure up images of Chaucer's band of jolly storytellers en route to St. Thomas's shrine at Canterbury. But this understanding of pilgrimage was actually quite a late development. In order to gain a deeper understanding of pilgrimage, we need to travel back in time a little further. A good place to start is with the Latin word for pilgrimage adopted in the Middle Ages, peregrinatio. Peregrinatio originally had nothing to do with religion, or indeed even with the act of travel. It originated as a technical term in Roman law, referring to the condition of being an alien, an outsider, a man without kin, friends, or patrons. A peregrinus soon came to mean someone residing outside their native homeland, in other words, a stranger. This purely secular meaning of peregrinatio continued into the late Middle Ages, but at some point it also began to accrue religious connotations. The transition from stranger to pilgrim in medieval thought can be illustrated with the evolution of the Road to Emmaus story found in St. Luke's Gospel. Failing to recognize Jesus, surprised that the man they meet on their travels seems unaware of the news of the crucifixion, the disciples inquire, "Are you such a stranger in Jerusalem that you don't know about the events of the last few days?" In the 4th century Vulgate translation, the word used for stranger is peregrinus. By the 12th century, however, the biblical stranger had been transformed into medieval pilgrim. Its manuscript image from the St. Albans Psalter shows Christ fully fitted out in contemporary pilgrim clothing. The origins of the word peregrinatio, then, suggest that the main characteristic of early medieval pilgrimage was what we might call strangerhood. The peregrinus, the pilgrim stranger, sacrificed family, home, and material comforts in the service of God. It was, of course, a mission enjoined on the disciples by Jesus. It was also a kind of religious exile in the Jewish tradition, and some of the earliest peregrini were monks in the Celtic fringes of Britain who travelled to island monasteries to live ascetic lives for renunciation and retreat. In the early Middle Ages, the idea of the pilgrim stranger remained key. Indeed, when the word peregrinatio came to mean the practice of visiting holy shrines, its use was limited to far distant foreign destinations such as Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago, where one was, indeed, a stranger in a foreign land. It wasn't until much later in the Middle Ages that journeys to local saint shrines were known as pilgrimages. For most of the medieval period, local shrine visitation didn't count as pilgrimage. The now familiar category of local pilgrimage was, linguistically speaking at least, a contradiction in terms. Another key component of medieval pilgrimage was penance. Exile and renunciation were clearly sacrificial activities which needed some higher purpose. So peregrinatio was integrated into the medieval doctrine of sin and redemption. Pilgrimage was counted among the various penances which the church meted out to contrite sinners who had confessed and been absolved by a priest. As a penitential exercise, pilgrimage was viewed as medicine for the soul and a way of lessening one's time spent in purgatory. A 12th century sermon written for St. James's feast day exemplifies the penitential but redemptive nature of medieval pilgrimage. It describes the pilgrimage to Santiago as the route of penitence and salvation from sin, and the shrine itself as the place where sins of men are forgiven. Reconciliation with God was to be found at the journey's end, but it had to be earned. The message constantly reiterated by churchmen was that pilgrimage was a penitential activity and a certain amount of suffering should ideally be involved. In the Middle Ages, as today, there was often a discernible disconnect between what devout Christians were supposed to do and what they actually did. There certainly were pilgrims who took the church's message seriously, who set out for distant lands on foot in penitential garb, making the journey as painful and as difficult as they could. Not all did so voluntarily. The Irish monastic tradition of sending monks off on pilgrimage to atone for their sins soon became a more general judicial proceeding. The 11th and 12th centuries saw convicted murderers weighed down by penitential chains, rattling their way around Europe towards Rome and other holy places. By the 14th century, more ordinary parishioners, guilty of far less serious misdemeanors, were sent by their bishops to local shrines. At around the same time, shrine visiting as a voluntary practice was also becoming more popular and widespread, and not least in England, where most major cathedrals and abbeys and many minor churches had their own miracle-working saint. Get some idea of who went on these kinds of pilgrimages by looking at contemporary miracle collections produced by religious houses. The Miracle of St. Friedewald, for example, recalls 135 pilgrims coming to St. Friedewald Shrine in Oxford in the early 1180s. We find that the majority of recorded visitors were women seeking miraculous cures for themselves and their children, and many were local residents or visitors from nearby towns. Given the popular appeal of this kind of pilgrimage, it's easy to see how the central theological messages of exile and penitence were often watered down in the minds of those whose motivations were rather more banal than churchmen would have liked. Medieval sermons advising the laity about how they should conduct themselves on pilgrimage. Many stressed the importance of going on foot and travelling light like the apostles. These instructions have resonated down the centuries and are, of course, faithfully followed by modern pilgrims on the Camino. Last year, 94% of those who completed the last 100 kilometres did so on foot, carrying only the barest essentials. It's usually assumed that walking is a normative, as well as a traditional, method of getting to a Catholic shrine. The irony here is that, traditionally, most Catholics wouldn't dream of going by foot if there were suitable alternatives. They piled onto trains to go to Lourdes the moment steam transport was invented, and airports such as those at Santiago and Knockin Island have made pilgrimage journeys even easier. Worldwide, Catholic pilgrimage is still characterised by diocesan bus tours, parish minibus groups, and air and train travel, not by footsore long-distance walkers. As for the Camino, it only became a hiking trail in the 1970s, but it was promoted as a cultural tourist itinerary by the Council of Europe. Before this time, Santiago pilgrims tended to arrive by bus or car. A similar travel scenario was true for the Middle Ages. Although there were penitential pilgrims who opted for harsh, punishing methods of travel, the majority of pilgrims were usually intent on reaching their destination as efficiently, quickly, and as safely as possible. The medieval Camino was no exception. And we can see this by looking at the famous book associated with the Santiago pilgrimage, 12th century Codex Callistinus. Among the Codex's 5 texts is a sermon which issues the usual advice that pilgrims should travel in poverty and walk on foot like the apostles. However, the other texts in the Codex tell us a different story. The Pilgrim's Guide, a kind of medieval guide to the Camino, and a collection of miracle stories associated with St. James, revealed that most pilgrims ignored this advice and travelled on horseback. Another Santiago pilgrim, the 15th century housewife Marjorie Kemp, provides us with further information about pilgrimage travel and the autobiography which describes her pilgrimages to the Holy Land and around Europe. It's true that Marjorie sometimes walked, but she also paid for rides in pilgrim wagons, hired a horse for riding, and tried to hitch a lift in a private carriage. As was customary, she was taken around the Holy Land on a donkey. She seems to have adopted the method of travel which was most convenient at the time. In Marjorie's case, speed often seems to have been the essence of a good pilgrimage, and this is especially striking with respect to her visit to the shrine of St. James at Santiago. Remarkably, Marjorie manages a return trip from England in just 25 days, less time than it takes modern pilgrims to walk one way from the Camino's usual starting point at the French border. Marjorie's amazing turn of speed was a result of a direct sea route which just opened up between Bristol and the Spanish port of La Coruna, 40 miles north of Santiago. It was a travel innovation that cut off weeks, even months, from the overland journey. it made the trans-European route, the modern Camino Francis, largely obsolete for English pilgrims. Marjorie didn't see her avoidance of walking as cheating, in quite the same way that many pilgrims might today. Indeed, she portrays herself as a pious pilgrim and was famously renowned for her penitential behaviour. The reason why Marjorie didn't espouse the modern trends of slow travel was because she saw no value in walking. Walking was a mundane, everyday activity in the Middle Ages and, unlike today, not considered out of the ordinary. More significantly, though, Marjorie's mode of transport wasn't important because she didn't believe that her journeys had any spiritual merit. They were simply a means of getting to her goal, the pilgrimage destination. The idea that a pilgrimage journey is of no special consequence would be something of an anathema to modern Camino pilgrims for whom the journey is everything. However, the idea that journeying to a shrine should be a meaningful spiritual experience was not one that most medieval pilgrims seemed to share. Contemporary pilgrim narratives suggest that few travellers gave their journeys any religious meaning. The author of the 12th century Pilgrim's Guide to Santiago warns about the obstacles and challenges pilgrims might meet on their journey, such as poisonous fish, overloaded ferries, and disagreeable locals. But these penitential menaces aren't framed within any kind of religious or spiritual discourse. Unlike the modern Camino guides, the medieval one has no section for personal reflections and spiritual musings. Marjorie Kemp is another pilgrim who depicts her travels in a secular, mundane way. Her long-distance journeys are often tough. She's forced to sleep in a barn, she travels with vermin-infested beggars, and falls sick after struggling to keep up with her fitter companions. However, she never once gives her travel hardships any religious significance. Marjorie's concerns are all practical rather than spiritual. It's her anxieties about her personal safety which surface foremost in her mind. Marjorie and other long-distance pilgrims in the Middle Ages, the religious element of pilgrimage and the real physical and spiritual hard work only really seems to materialise on arrival at their destination. In contrast to her fast route marches across Europe, Marjorie lingers for weeks on end in Rome, doing the prescribed holy circuits, living in penury, and carrying out tough penances. These are self-imposed austerities she doesn't voluntarily embrace while travelling. In other words, it's her devotional and penitential activities at the various holy places she visits, which, for Marjorie, are spiritually efficacious, not the effort of getting there. The same is true of other long-distance pilgrims in the Middle Ages. When the 15th century German friar, Felix Fabri, arrived in Jerusalem, he and his companion were immediately taking on a tour of the holy places. This wasn't a sightseeing excursion, but a grueling devotional journey necessitating physical, mental, and spiritual endurance, which, as he says, not all of his party were strong enough to withstand. Indeed, he says, no one should think visiting the holy place is to be a light task. There is the intense heat of the sun, the walking from place to place, the kneeling, the prostration. Above all, there is the strain which everyone puts on himself in striving with all his might to rouse himself to earnest piety and comprehension of what is shown him in the holy places, and to devout prayer and meditation, all of which cannot be done without great fatigue. Because to do them fitly, a man should be at rest and not rambling about. To struggle after mental abstraction while bodily walking from place to place is exceedingly toilsome. Some of our pilgrims were unable to undergo it and went down to the hospital to rest, so that it was only less than half of them that persevered in the labour of pilgrimage. Much Christian pilgrimage in the Middle Ages, then, seems to have been destination-based, not journey-orientated. One reason for this was because there was much to occupy the time of pious pilgrims in holy places. Holy cities, for example, were saturated with different sacred hotspots demanding a pilgrim's attention. The most significant were often linked by prescribed routes, taking pilgrims on many journeys from location to location. Most famously, Rome and Jerusalem had approved stations where pilgrims would halt and spend time in prayer. In medieval Jerusalem, the stations clustered around the Holy Sepulchre Church and were later evolved into the Via Dolorosa, Way of Sorrows. In Rome, stations were based on 7 principal churches, but the most ambitious pilgrims attempted the rounds of many more. William Way, a 15th century Devonshire priest, claimed to have counted no fewer than 467 churches worthy of a pilgrim's visit. For ardent Christians, visiting Rome could be a time-consuming business. From around the 12th century, destination-based rituals grew in importance due to the development of indulgences, granted by the Pope and other bishops to pilgrims visiting selected altars and shrines. Indulgences promised remission of time spent in purgatory. Significantly, indulgences were attached to specific places, not to journeys. Pilgrims were required to be physically present at their destination to receive the benefit. And little has changed in this respect. The plenary indulgences offered at Santiago are still conditional on pilgrims' physical presence in the cathedral. The idea that pilgrimage proper only takes place at one's destination is one that modern Catholics readily understand. As we've already seen, Lourdes has no tradition of walking. However, this doesn't make the modern pilgrimage any less physically exacting. Today, the typical Lourdes pilgrimage takes 5 or 6 days, comprises numerous daily rounds of rituals and services within the sacred grounds. One of Christianity's toughest pilgrimages is St. Patrick's Purgatory on Station Island, on Loch Derg, County Donegal. In the Middle Ages, pilgrims were enclosed for a day and a night in a small vaulted cave attached to a monastic church. Modern-day pilgrims are likewise stranded in a bounded location and carry out their pilgrimage around the medieval ruins under open skies. They arrive by boat and, over 3 days, complete repetitive stations around the so-called beds, involving a continual cycle of prayers, ritual gestures, and kneeling. The pilgrimage is undertaken barefoot, and other austerities include all-night vigils and fasting. The point about Lourdes and Loch Derg is that, in each case, the formal pilgrimage rituals only commence on arrival at a fixed sacred location. These aren't isolated examples. Numerous other Catholic pilgrimages around the world place great emphasis on destination rituals, which pilgrims might perform in various penitential ways, barefoot, on their knees, crawling, or, in this case, carrying heavy stones. In other words, while penitential walking is often a major feature of Catholic pilgrimage, it's usually done within the confined space of the site. The exception to this is a penitential walk, often undertaken the last mile or so before reaching a shrine. Medieval pilgrims removed their footwear and assumed a penitential attitude for the last leg of the journey. The slipper chapel at the start of the Holy Mile, Walsingham, is said to mark such a spot. And other examples include Mount Joy, where the city of Jerusalem was first glimpsed. Medieval pilgrims reaching this spot would dismount from their horses, attach crosses to their clothes, remove their shoes, and continue their journey barefoot. For pilgrims following these customs, this form of penitential walking was not a private, long-distance test of endurance, but was instead a symbolic public act performed within the site of a sacred destination. Most medieval pilgrims, then, travel to a holy shrine wasn't envisaged as a spiritual journey. Although spiritual journeying was an important component of the pilgrimage experience, it usually took place at or close to a designated sacred site. The point of pilgrimage for the majority of Christians was not the experience of travel, but the destination itself, because the destination held the promise of coming close to the divine. One reason for the medieval emphasis on the destination was that the church traditionally held a very poor view of the spaces between religious sites. The pilgrim's journey took him or her through dangerous places full of worldly temptations and cul-de-sacs of immorality and vice. Stories abounded of female pilgrims being led sexually astray, and the sermon in the Codex Callistinus counseled Santiago-bound pilgrims against drunkenness and brawling on their journey. Pilgrims were constantly cautioned to ignore their surroundings as they travelled and to keep their sights firmly fixed on their goal. Curiosity was a sin which would surely lead to temptation. These kinds of warnings were strengthened by the attitude of the medieval church towards the natural environment. Today, rural and wilderness landscapes are thought to be conducive to spiritual contemplation, and many people prefer to see God in nature rather than in man-made church. However, before the Romantic movement of the late 18th century, which I'll come back to later, the countryside was viewed in a very different light. Christian texts associated uninhabited landscapes with the devil, not with God. In hagiography, saints bravely ventured into the godless wilderness to fight the devil and to stamp out the pagan rituals, which were synonymous with the countryside, as the etymology of the word pagan, paganus, countryman, suggests. Colonizing the spiritual wilderness with churches was one way in which Christianity's heroes kept the devil at bay. Monasteries and churches then were presented as sanctified refuges, made more holy by the presence of the saints who had banished the devil from their doors. It was within these safe, man-made structures where medieval pilgrims were urged to come to find God and salvation, not in the demon-infested countryside. At the epicenter of these holy sanctuaries lay the very threshold of heaven, the saint's shrine, the place just behind the high altar where the veil between this world and the next was the flimsiest. These were the thin places in the medieval imagination, not the countryside, which lay forever threatening outside. Pilgrimage, then, was mostly a destination event in the Middle Ages. For devotees, the main point of pilgrimage was to be bodily present at the places which provided the faithful with tangible, material connections to God. To draw near to these places and to touch the objects which had come into contact with Christ and the saints was an important motivation for pious believers. For medieval pilgrims, these specific locations were spiritual portals to the divine. While pilgrimage still remains largely a destination event for most Catholics, for others it's a very different pilgrimage culture has emerged. Television documentaries, films, novels, social media, and forms of popular culture are increasingly imagining pilgrimage as a travel experience, with walking valorized as meritorious and an ancient mode of travel. It's a perception of pilgrimage which diverges so drastically from the medieval practice that it begs the question, why? What is it about modern Western culture that has prompted and perpetuated such a transformation in pilgrimage practice and belief? In an attempt to answer this, I'd like to take a quick look at three cultural movements which, I believe, have contributed to this major conceptual shift. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century, the Romantic movement at the turn of the 19th century, and the New Age movement of the 1980s may, at first glance, seem unlikely shapers of pilgrimage. However, these three cultural turning points have, in their different ways, provided many of the essential ingredients for the pilgrimage revival which we're witnessing today, and provide an explanation as to why the Archbishop of York was more interested in his pilgrimage journey than in his pilgrimage destination. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century and its impact on pilgrimage needs no introduction, especially to this audience. What I'd like to stress, however, is the effect that banning saint veneration had on the way in which pilgrimage came to be perceived in the Protestant imagination. As I'll explain, the demise of saint veneration indirectly led to the idea that pilgrimage is primarily about the journey, a commonplace assumption now, but one which owes much to the Reformation. So let's take English as an example. As we know, one of the first things that Henry VIII's commissioners tried to do was to obliterate pilgrimage in its material form. This was achieved by removing and destroying physical remnants of the practice, because shrines, relics, votive offerings, and local saints had been at the heart of pilgrimage. Their annihilation seemed like an effective way of guaranteeing the end of an activity deemed to be corrupt and idolatrous. As added insurance against the saint's return, Protestant churches also rejected the Catholic doctrine of saintly intercession, thereby effectively stripping the saints of their spiritual potency as well as their materiality. As a result of the Reformation, then, saints were no longer present in specific places to comfort the faithful. At best, they were long-dead heroes worthy of emulation. At worst, they were popish idols. Protestant congregations were taught that God wasn't to be found in lifeless saints and relics. God was everywhere, and Christians were to seek him in their hearts rather than in particular places. Destination pilgrimages, along with their rituals, therefore vanished from English churches, and Protestant doctrine meant that there was no likelihood that they would ever make their comeback, at least in the medieval form. While destination pilgrimages played no part in Reformation Europe, the same wasn't quite true of that other, previously less important aspect of pilgrimage, the journey. A literary genre which had become increasingly popular in the late Middle Ages, the pilgrim allegory, found renewed popularity in early modern England. The metaphor of pilgrimage as a Christian's life journey had been around since the earliest years of Christianity. However, it came to accrue more significance at a time when physical pilgrimage was no longer possible. Protestants argued that the life journey interpretation of pilgrimage was the only form validated in the Bible, and this made it particularly attractive for Christian fundamentalists like the Puritan John Bunyan. Pilgrim's Progress marched to popularize the idea of pilgrimage as an interior journey of the soul, as a long, challenging journey mapped out across a symbolic terrain. With the shrines gone, saints' days abolished, destination rituals forgotten, and pilgrimage transformed into an interior journey, Christians readjusted their ideas about pilgrimage. In the Protestant imagination, pilgrimage was no longer a practice which took place in shrines and churches. Instead, it was transferred onto a wider canvas and reinvented as linear travel, albeit linear travel in the mind. One of the consequences of the Protestant Reformation, then, was to erase destination pilgrimages from the collective cultural memory and replace them with the idea of pilgrimage as a journey. When pilgrimage returned as a physical reality in the modern period, it therefore only seemed natural to graft the twin themes of spiritual journeying and moral questing onto the renewed bodily activity. Today's newfound Protestant pilgrimages tend to combine the physical and the spiritual, the material and the metaphorical, in a variety of creative ways, depending on where an individual church stands within the Anglican tradition. What most of them do, however, is firmly anchor the idea of pilgrimage in the journey, thereby avoiding some of the more difficult issues inherent in bringing back to life what is essentially a Roman Catholic practice. The Reformation had reset pilgrimage as a spiritual journey. In the late 18th and early 19th century, Protestant Europe and North America witnessed a revolutionary way of conceptualizing the natural environment, which was to have a lasting effect on Western culture. The catalyst was the Industrial Revolution, which brought with it rapid urbanisation, overcrowding, industrial pollution, and ill health. Before this time, the countryside was not particularly valued, except as a source of food and other human commodities. For medieval churchmen based in towns and monasteries, the countryside, as we've already seen, had been a primitive, unformed place infested with demons and disease. Urban environments, on the other hand, were synonymous with civilization and social well-being. It's no coincidence that heaven was envisaged as a city in Western thought. However, the harsh realities of modern industrial urbanization soon overturned this view. For many living through the rapid industrial and social changes, the city came to epitomize everything bad about modernity and progress, while the countryside, in contrast, was viewed as natural, authentic, conducive to good health. Country life, once considered rustic and backward, suddenly had an appeal. For some, rural landscapes also suggested a comforting continuity in times of rapid change, a reminder of a better and more genuine world before the event of modernity. This shift in attitudes took root most famously in the European Romantic movement around the turn of the 19th century. In Britain, artists and poets such as John Constable and William Wordsworth took great aesthetic pleasure in the British countryside, which they viewed as an antidote to the city. In particular, Romantics discovered that nature was sublime. That is, they understood that the natural world contained an awe-inspiring, almost terrifying beauty, which suggested that human beings were only a tiny part of a much grander whole. In defiance of Enlightenment rationality, the Romantics enjoyed sensory encounters of nature and experienced landscapes in deeply emotional, intuitive, and personal ways. Wordsworth famously took long solitary walks in the Lake District, communing with nature and his innermost thoughts. This behaviour was taken one step further in 1845 by Henry David Thoreau. Living a semi-hermit-like existence on the shores of Walden Pond in the American state of Massachusetts, Thoreau was an exponent of transcendental philosophy, which theorized that spiritual insight could be gained through intuition and in nature. Thoreau's fellow transcendentalist, Ralph Waldo Emerson, shared Thoreau's love of the wilderness and believed that nature was imbued with a divine presence and that engaging deeply with it enabled one to discover a more natural, authentic version of ourselves. Put another way, the transcendentalists were convinced that rural environments had the power to transform us into better human beings. The Romantics and Transcendentalists bequeathed a range of new concepts to Western culture, which would eventually influence the way in which modern pilgrims engage with their landscapes. These include the idea of communing spiritually with nature, the therapeutic benefits of walking outdoors, the importance of individual experience, and the view that we're more likely to discover our authentic selves in natural environments away from the stresses of modern life. Perhaps more importantly, figures like Wordsworth and Emerson believed that transcendental or numerous encounters need not be associated with a traditional Christian God. What seems to have emerged in the Romantic era is not only a radical revision of mankind's relationship with the natural world, but also a new form of spirituality, understood as an emotional rather than as a religious experience. There was, of course, another important element to Romanticism, which was to have a major influence in later pilgrimage revivals, namely medievalism. In looking back with a nostalgic yearning and wonder at the ruined remnants of a lost medieval past, the Romantics were paving the way for Gothic revivalism, the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, the arts and craft movement, the Oxford movement, and contemporary Celtic Christianity. The last two of these were to inspire and instigate two very different forms of modern pilgrimage. However, the romantic yearning to re-enchant the world with a sense of ancient mystery probably found its the most influential expression in the New Age movement of the 1980s. Pilgrimage legitimately returned post-Reformation England in the late 19th century, prompted by the Catholic emancipation on the one hand and by the Oxford movement on the other. However, for many decades, English pilgrimage remained in the shadows, its practice limited to the Catholic minority and a small number of high church Anglicans. It also mostly conformed to the traditional destination model and, out of public view, usually went unnoticed. Although annual walking pilgrimages started appearing in mainstream Anglican churches in the 20th century, their uptake by the wider population had much more to do with cultural changes prompted by the 1980s movement known as New Age. The New Age movement was essentially a British and American phenomenon, and, like the hippie movement of the 1960s, began as a youthful countercultural backlash against structural society and its institutions, including the established church. Turning their back on traditional Western values and religion, the espousers of New Age lifestyles embraced what were referred to at the time as alternative spiritualities, usually taken to mean non-Western religions and philosophies such as Buddhism, Taoism, and Hinduism. New Age spirituality was actually part of a wider cultural shift, coined the Easternization of the West by sociologists. From the 1960s onwards, it saw the introduction of exotic consumer products, such as yogurt and yoga, empty Western markets. As with yogurt and yoga, Eastern spirituality has now bled almost indiscernibly into the mainstream and has itself become a valuable commodity. However, it's worth emphasizing just how radical this cultural shift from West to East was at the time, and the seismic impact which Easternized spirituality has had on religious culture, and particularly on pilgrimage today. One of the key differences between Western and Eastern spirituality, and the one which most forcibly accounts for the changes in today's pilgrimage culture, is their divergent mystic traditions. In the Middle Ages, the Aristotelian belief that spirit and matter are contrary, oppositional forces, led to the idea that communion with the divine necessitated transcending the world and the self. God could only be reached by repudiating all things material and worldly, and by rising above the human emotions to reach a higher plane. A notable contrast, Eastern mysticism takes a completely different path. In Eastern religion, the soul is connected to the world around, and cosmic harmony depends on the interconnection of all things. In other words, while Western mystics transcend the world, Eastern mystics dive more deeply into it, and while the Western route to God required self-abnegation, the Eastern path involved a holistic integration of body, mind, and soul of the world. The new breed of spiritual seekers were also pilgrims who ritually engaged with traditional sacred sites in imaginative ways. In 1987, the medieval route to St. James's Shrine in Santiago also gained a New Age makeover with the publication of Paulo Coelho's novel, The Pilgrimage, which I mentioned earlier. A fantasy version of the author's own walk along the Camino introduced a number of new concepts to the practice of pilgrimage, all of them informed by Eastern spirituality. These included the spiritual benefits of slow travel, the notion of being fully present in the moment through meditation techniques, and the idea of pilgrimage as a quest to discover the true self. Crucially, the story revolves around the hero's transformative inner journey. The physical destination, the shrine of St. James, only appears in the epilogue as an afterthought. Today's Camino pilgrims are walking less in the footsteps of their medieval ancestors and more in those of Coelho's New Age hero. Another strand of New Age culture, which has gone on to help popularize pilgrimage today, is its early environmentalism. As we've seen, the idea that the natural environment should be valued on its own terms, and that humans might seek spiritual solace in nature, had first come to the fore with the European Romanticism and American Transcendentalism. The 1980s and 1990s, however, saw a revival of these ideas, first of contemporary paganism, which some commentators called nature religion, and then the environmental initiatives such as Martin Palmer's 1997 project, evocatively titled Sacred Land, the Rehallowing of Britain. Palmer's accompanying book, Sacred Britain, explained that the aim of the project was to spiritually reconnect people with their natural landscape, a connection he claimed that had been lost in the Industrial Revolution. One of his ideas was to reopen old pilgrimage routes as a means of returning to a time when, in his words, we saw the sacred in everything. Here, we see the Protestant belief in the immanence of God, romantic nostalgia for the countryside, and New Age nature religion perfectly combine. 26 years after the publication of Sacred Britain, Palmer's dream of resacralizing Britain with pilgrim trails seems remarkably to be coming to fruition. However, the new trails, along with the pilgrims who tread them, seem to owe remarkably little to our medieval heritage and rather more to the Protestant and secularizing forces which have shaped our collective mentalities since the 16th century. New Age culture is no longer thought of zany and weird. From yoga to mindfulness, what were once alternative spiritualities are now part of everyday life. In fact, so pervasive had this new spiritual mindset become that sociologists have claimed that we're living in a post-secular world and that contemporary spirituality has become the new religion. But as commentators have noticed, it's a religion in which its devotees are abandoning church pews in favour of taking to the fields and footpaths. Heir to the Protestant Reformation, Romantic idealism, Emerson's environmentalism, and New Age rebellion, post-secular pilgrimage favours the outdoor journey over the indoor destination and prefers communing with nature rather than communing with saints. There are, of course, other more prosaic reasons why walking pilgrimages have found favour in the 21st century. As in the late 18th century, a dissatisfaction with modernity and contemporary culture is bringing people out into nature. Anxieties about the environment, climate change, personal health, and mental well-being, for example, induce many to swap the traditional packaged beach holiday overseas for a therapeutic, carbon-neutral, and environmentally friendly walk through the English countryside. While in the Middle Ages, pilgrimage was good for the soul, in the 21st century is good for the body, the mind, the environment, and the climate. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the current pilgrimage revival, however, is its reincarnation as a secular leisure activity and the ease with which pilgrimage has peeled away from its religious and institutional ties. The founders of the British Pilgrimage Trust encourage us to bring our own beliefs and, rather more strangely, Canterbury Cathedral issues a reassurance to prospective walkers on the pilgrim's way that you don't have to be religious to go on pilgrimage. Pilgrimage today is carefully tailored towards our modern cultural values of inclusivity and diversity, as well as tapping into our modern anxieties such as mental health and climate change. In conclusion then, pilgrimage has been on a remarkable transformative journey from its Christian beginnings in the early Middle Ages to its most recent manifestation as a post-secular spiritual experience. Along the way, it's seen a shift from destination to journey, from the material to the spiritual, from man-made buildings to the natural environment, from the saint to the self, and from Western tradition to Eastern philosophy. In today's post-secular reconfiguration of pilgrimage, the kind of activities which once took place in churches are now enacted out of doors, away from the material trappings of the traditional saint veneration. Anglican pilgrimages invite prayers and meditative silences along the route, and participants are encouraged to walk mindfully. Walking the Camino del Norte in 2016, the Archbishop of York penned daily spiritual sonnets, but not addressed to the saints. As for the nuns, the non-religious, pilgrimage is now an acceptable leisure activity on a par with an adventurous hike. For some, it has therapeutic benefits, and the word spirituality is understood as a form of cathartic healing, or as heightened emotion, or as a means to reflect on one's life or to resolve a problem. For others, spirituality is a search for higher meaning. Walking outdoors seems to be a fundamental aspect of the post-secular pilgrimage, in tune with the idea, originating in the Romantic movement, that nature can help us to connect to something beyond ourselves. In tracing the way that pilgrimage has developed over the centuries, I focus on just one strand of the practice, the part which sheared away from the medieval model at the Reformation and followed a distinctive Protestant trajectory. I've also hinted that this is often a very different kind of pilgrimage from those practiced by Catholics. However, Catholicism is not entirely resistant to cultural change, and the most striking addition to Catholic practice in the last few years is the adoption of new walking pilgrimages. The Catholic Herald introduced its first organised walking pilgrimage in 2019, and the Walsingham Camino was launched last year. Perhaps more notably, a 3-year project to develop pilgrimage routes in the English and Welsh Catholic diocese is currently underway, led by Phil McCarthy. Taking pilgrims between Catholic shrines and places of worship, it offers a Catholic equivalent of the well-established Anglican network of pilgrim trails, promoted here by the British Pilgrimage Trust. Outside the UK, pilgrims are increasingly finding their way to Catholic shrines on foot. The Via Francigena from Canterbury to Rome is growing in popularity with long-distance walkers, despite the fact that its most celebrated medieval user, the 10th century Archbishop of Canterbury, Segeric, almost certainly didn't walk. And then there's the Jerusalem Way, an ambitious trans-European route from Spain to Jerusalem, also designed for hikers, a travel option barely conceivable in the Middle Ages. Pilgrimage, then, is changing with changing times. The story behind these changes is important, and not just for understanding the evolution of a religious practice. Pilgrimage is a cultural mirror which reflects our values, our fears, our ideals, and even our prejudices at different times in history. Today, whether it's associated with the Catholic shrine or a journey to a much-loved tree, as in this example, which you might have noticed from the news headlines last week, a pilgrimage is a way of expressing what matters to us. As you can see from comments made on social media recently, this place on Hadrian's Wall, with its iconic sycamore, was, for some people, a sacred place endowed with personal memories and spiritual significance. Whether or not a journey to a tree can be considered a pilgrimage, I'll leave for you to decide. Thank you.
Could we start the video, please? That's it. Right. Okay. So, Lynn, if you could just start the video for me, because I can't start it from my end. Right. Well, thank you very much, Anne, for a fascinating, wide-ranging talk this evening. There's lots of interesting points made there. So, some really interesting things mentioned. So one of the interesting things that Anne's mentioned is that in the medieval period, the destination appeared to be the important thing rather than the journey. I wonder whether that's to do with Aristotelian philosophy and the separation between body and soul, which was kind of underpinned these things. But the destination and the spiritual experience and the liminal experience at this holy site, be it Walsingham, Rome, or wherever, was probably very important. Whereas today, the journey itself seems to be also very important. I think that's correct, Anne, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I've looked at a lot of medieval sources, and as I've said in my talk, it's
Mm.
really the emphasis is on the destination. Of course, saint shrines and relics, they were a huge thing in the Middle Ages.
Yes, interestingly, it's the holy day of St. Thomas Cantilupe today. I don't know whether you knew that.
I was confused whether it's today or yesterday. On social media, some people seem to have celebrated it yesterday and other people
No,
today.
it's the third. Officially, it's the
Okay.
third, so it's today. And
Yeah, I saw the shrine just a few months ago, actually, the
yes,
new
at
the new shrine. It's
Hereford.
wonderful. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
he was born at Hambledon in Buckinghamshire, as a matter of interest. I know because I looked it up today, and he died in Italy at Ferento, but his heart and some of his bones were taken to Hereford, where there is a reconstructed shrine in the cathedral, I believe. Which I think Anne, you visited, haven't you?
Yeah, I went just a few months ago. It's an incredible thing. It's really worth a visit if anybody's ever in Hereford.
And some of the shrines are being rebuilt, reconstructed in some of the cathedrals. For example, at St. David's, there's a reconstructed shrine there, isn't there? And at St. Albans, I'm trying to think where else there is actually.
Well, Oxford, of course.
Oxford, of course, St.
Prize White
Fried's Wide
Shrine.
one.
Yeah, don't forget
Absolutely.
Oxford.
Yes, I've visited it many times. Uh,
Yeah.
they've reassembled it like a jigsaw from the broken bits that they found in various places. Trying to think where else was Lichfield, of course, as well.
St.
Most
Chad.
recently,
Yeah,
yeah, St. Chad.
yeah.
So
A very new relic shrine there.
it is absolutely in the last year, I think. So it seems to me that shrines seem to be becoming more common or popular in the Anglican Church, and therefore people are going on pilgrimage in the Anglican tradition as well as the Catholic tradition as well. And there's a lovely statue at Pwllheli in North Wales, statue of Our Lady, and that's really interesting. And the local Anglicans organise pilgrimages, and they walk to a local well and so on. It seems to be becoming very, very popular, and that's picking up the medieval tradition of pilgrimage to a shrine of Our Lady at Pwllheli in the medieval period. So that's kind of a modern iteration, really, of pilgrimage. I would trace the sort of understanding of the journey as being part of the spiritual thing, certainly in the Catholic tradition, to about 1947, after the war, when men, and it was men, not women, walked from various different places in England, and I think possibly in Scotland, to Walsingham carrying crosses. And that was a real sort of hardship in those days, walking that long distance. And then that turned into Student Cross, which is now known as
Yeah.
Pilgrim Cross. I did it a
Awesome.
couple of times in my youth, and walked about 100 miles. And the journey was very important because each day you had what was called stations, and they're still done. I did a day of it, the Oxford leg, this year and last year as well. And each day you have stations, as they're called, and you stop and you pray, and people give a little mini sermon almost, or a little talk or thought for the day at each of these stations during the day, which is quite a nice thing. And you carry a cross, which is about 3 meters solid oak, and it takes 3 people to carry it, and I can tell you it's heavy after a while. And the first time I did it, we walked across East Anglia, and we were filmed by the BBC for a program on pilgrimage, which was quite an interesting thing. And a great experience. So the actual journey was part of the spiritual activity, as well as the arriving at the destination as well. Anyway, we've hopefully got some questions here or comments. So, right. So Harry has said, how would you respond to an arduous journey, long walk, is necessary today, as it was inherently understood it was arduous in the medieval times? I guess in the medieval times you had to get there, and walking was an everyday, ordinary thing. So today, the walking, Anne, would you agree that's a major part of it today?
Yeah, I would also say that in the modern period, we tend to think about challenge, the word challenge. People are doing it for personal reasons, as a personal challenge. That's the big thing today. And that wouldn't have been the way that it was thought about in the Middle Ages at all. It was for penitence, it was for God, it was very, very, very religious. And now quite a few people, I'm sure, are doing it because it's a way of proving to themselves that they can do it, I think. It's more of a, what I'm trying to say, it's more of a personal thing than a religious thing, I think, now.
Yeah, and it is a challenge, isn't it? Because we'd ride around in cars and things like that, so it's unusual for us to walk long distance, as opposed to the medieval idea when they had to walk long distances, they had no choice. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so various walks like the Camino, for example, and the Via Francigena are examples of modern pilgrimage in Europe, and obviously Walsingham and the various other walks that are now springing up all over the place. It's becoming extremely popular. So, yeah.
Yeah, one thing that's always intrigued me is that you never hear of medieval pilgrims having blisters, because I presume they're used to walking. Those that did walk, you know, that had to walk, they were used to walking, so they didn't have blisters. Today, if you go on the Camino, every second person is sort of limping with blisters. It's the big talking point. And I think that says quite a lot about the difference between medieval pilgrimage and pilgrimage today.
Hmm. Always intrigues me about medieval footwear that they had sort of simple leather shoes, no heels at all, and they must have felt every stone and rock on the way. I don't know how they did that, but they had apparently a different gait and a different way of walking from the way we do, and we're quite different. So yeah, something to bear in mind, really. Right, so we've got from Fran, how does the business side of the Middle Ages, guides, lodgings, refreshments, souvenirs, and of course they got the souvenir medallions and badges and things, didn't they, on the way, so like collecting the T-shirt today, compare with similar today? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that's really different today, if you walk to Santiago, and you have your shell on your backpack as a kind of symbol as what you're doing. In the Middle Ages, it wasn't it was more of a badge of reward when you actually got there. So you collected it and brought it back to show that you've done it. Today, the shell emblem was still the same, but it means something different. You know, it's not a badge of what you're doing, but to show that you've actually done it and you're coming back again. So that's one way it's a bit different. Of course, the commercial aspect of pilgrimage, that was very much there in the Middle Ages. A lot of pilgrimages, local pilgrimages and kind of regional ones, had fairs and markets attached, as quite sometimes they do today in Europe, you know, the big festivals. So it's about, you know, enjoying yourself as well as the more spiritual part of it as well. So yeah, so commercialism and what people now call the commoditation of pilgrimage, that a lot of religious people don't like, because they think that commercialism should be separate from religious things. The two were really combined in the Middle Ages, much as they are today, really, I suppose.
Yeah, and these pilgrim badges are very common. I mean, even today they're turning up all over the place. They must be extremely common, pointing to the fact that so many people did it. I mean, vast numbers of people did pilgrimage walks or journeys, or could be horseback too, to various local, and often they were very local sites. For example, Bicester Priory had the shrine of St. Edburga, and people would walk maybe 10, 20 miles there to a local one, and then further perhaps to the shrine of St. Friedwald in Oxford, or obviously much further to Canterbury, to Walsingham, to various other shrines. So, you know, not everybody walked. Many went on horseback, like on Canterbury Tales, for example. You know, it was getting there. They had to get there basically to the special site, and then get their badge and make their penances and say their prayers and have the spiritual liminal experience, I suppose, really. Obviously, people still walk to the Holy Mile to Walsingham from the Slipper Chapel in bare feet. Some people here may have done it. I've done it, and boy, is it painful on the feet. But yeah, it's still done today. Henry VIII even did it as well, believe it or not, and other kings and queens as well before them in the medieval period, because it was hugely popular.
Of course, the most common, or the most well known, is Henry II, who took his shoes off and walked the last mile to Canterbury Cathedral to atone for the murder of Becket. So that was the most famous king, probably, that did that.
Yes, and yeah, and he was very much attached to the veneration of the Blessed Virgin Mary as well, Walsingham. And you know, it seems to the medieval tradition seems to have begun in sort of, I don't know, roughly 11th, 12th century and so on, and then sort of carried on and became incredibly popular during the late medieval period. And as you say, there was a lot of money to be made in it, and a lot of the monks and the abbeys and cathedrals and so on must made a fortune from pilgrimage. That was the other side of it, which some reformers pointed to and didn't like particularly, as well as the sale of indulgences, which is a whole, you know, there's a lot of things written about that sort of thing. Anyway, John and Lindsay have said, most interesting talk, thank you. Fran says, fantastic talk, really interesting. I work in a cathedral, doesn't say which one, which was a destination for pilgrims, and this has cast a really informative light on it. So perhaps she'll be able to share that with visitors, perhaps. As we're on an island, we're on an island Orkney. Now we have a clue where we are. So it'd be St. Magnus then. So it'd be the Cathedral St. Magnus, I think. The main mode of travel would have been ship, of course. So yeah, as you say, people would have gone by ship to get to the shrine place quicker. So, for example, people came from the continent to Southampton and then walked from there to Canterbury. People went from England to La Coruña and then to finish the walk into Shrine of St. James in Spain. So I suppose quite a number of people would have gone by ship in those days. Whereas today we just think of it as a walking thing, but I mean, it could equally well be on horseback, bicycle, or any mode of transport when you think about it, I suppose.
Yeah, I've actually just published an article on maritime pilgrimages. If anybody's interested, it's in the conversation. So if you email me, I can give you a link to that.
Yeah, well, we can perhaps put that on the website, perhaps. Ian says, "Thank you for such an interesting talk!" Exclamation mark. So they obviously really enjoyed it. Femke, I think that's correct pronunciation, but apologize if it's not. Fascinating lecture. Thank you so much. You can see the theme here. Christopher says, thank you, Anne. Fascinating talk. Chris says, excellent talk. I think we can go on for a long time with this. Angela says, very enjoyable and most interesting talk. Thank you. Yes, St. Magnus. I was correct. It's Orkney. Yes, St. Magnus was a cathedral we mentioned earlier. Harry says, currently finishing a 2-month pilgrimage, I think it means, to Armine. Do you think the Catholic Church is doing sufficient work to utilize pilgrimages? What else do you think could be done to have pilgrimages focus on the destination, or should they?
Oh, right. That's a really interesting one. I'm not quite, I can't answer that as far as Catholic pilgrimages go.
Yeah.
The Anglican one is really interesting because I think you mentioned that saint shrines are becoming much more popular now.
Yes.
Which is really interesting, considering that I think some of the high churches do sort of have a more of a kind of Catholic take on this, but most of them are trying to distance themselves away from saint veneration as such. So in that respect, it's just really interesting to see how a lot of Anglican cathedrals are trying to encourage more people to go to their cathedrals and look at reconstructed saint shrines and to get to know the saints. I mean, St. Cuthbert is becoming a very popular saint up in Northumbria at the moment, and people are really encouraged to empathize with him as a historical character. And I think also it's a way of getting pilgrims who now are quite happy to go on a pilgrimage walk, to get those who are less interested in the religious aspect to actually get into the cathedrals and see the shrine and sort of look around and engage with more, if you like, with more of the religious aspects of cathedrals that they are doing now. So as for Catholic cathedrals, on Catholic shrines, I don't know, except I don't know if Phil McCarthy is in the audience at all, but as you know, he's setting up these pilgrimage routes, so maybe he could say something about that if he's there. If not, I would just like to re-emphasize that he is on a 3-year project of establishing routes between Catholic shrines and cathedrals. So that's one way of getting pilgrims to visit Catholic shrines and cathedrals, I suppose.
I don't think he's here this evening, but if anybody wants any information, because I'm one of the advisors or whatever it is, something like that anyway, for it. So I've written the information about medieval pilgrimage on the website. So the Hearts in Search of God website, if you look for that, there's information there. And if you have any questions for Dr. Phil McCarthy, then I could easily pass those on to him. We mentioned Andy Bull as well and pilgrimages. He's written 2 excellent books on pilgrimage. One was on pilgrimage places in the UK. There's another book by what's his name? Lord something or other. I'll come back to him in a minute. Which is a pilgrimage book as well. Lord Alton. Yeah, Lord Alton. So he's written a really interesting book, which I've got as well. But Andy Bull's book on the London to Walsingham pilgrimage route is really good. I went to the launch of his book a year or two ago in London, and that's really well worth it and well worth trying. There's lots of information online about that as well. So I'll just see if there's any more messages in here or questions. I can't see. Oh, yes, we have. Right. Okay. So Malcolm says, thanks, enjoyed the talk. Want to think more about the loss you described in the Reformation of the ability to go on pilgrimages. Of course, that was a major shock to people. One minute they can go on a pilgrimage to a holy site and pray and ask for intercession of the saint, because that was clearly the Catholic tradition of intercession, and also the Orthodox one as well, because pilgrimage is a big thing in the Orthodox Church as well, in a different way. But then it was suddenly stopped, in the 1530s. He says, I think we focus more on the destination, their destruction, or that of the shrines, rather than the loss of the journey as something to do. I'm wondering how much did people stop traveling as much to such sites after the Reformation? Well, it didn't stamp out Reformation pilgrimage entirely, because Holywell in North Wales has continued, and is the place of the longest history of continuous pilgrimage in the British Isles, and it didn't stamp it out at all. So the shrine, the holy place at Holywell, where people go in the water, continued right through the Reformation period and beyond. So,
can I just say something quickly about that? Yes, so Holywell, that's a bit different, actually. I was thinking about this earlier today, because of course you don't have saints' relics there, because the relics of Winifred were taken to Shrewsbury and of course lost at the Reformation. But quite often pilgrimage, Holywells, where they did continue. I think this is one of the reasons why Holywell and St Winifred's Shrine and Wales continued, because a lot of these they weren't considered so bad in a way, because they didn't have relics, and quite often the Holywells were quite small. And of course they evolved into spas. St Anne's Well in Buxton is a famous example. So they've evolved into spas and into wishing wells, and then became more popular in the Victorian period. So I think this is one of the reasons. I don't know, I might be wrong here, but I think it's one of the reasons why Holywell in Wales actually survived, because it wasn't, it wasn't about the relics and saints so much. It was about a place that could easily be turned into a spa in the 17th and 18th centuries.
Interesting. Well, it did very much continue as a Catholic place of pilgrimage. Even the conspirators of the so-called gunpowder plot, I put say so-called, actually went to Holywell before it, believe it or not, before their misguided attempts at blowing up Parliament. But so it continued very much as a Catholic sort of place of pilgrimage. I think partly to do with the local landowner, who was Catholic, really, who encouraged it and allowed it, really. So that definitely continued. But in other places, yes, as Anne said, they did sort of change into other things, really. One or two last points, I think, because we mustn't go on forever, really. Let me see. Franca, could you please share your opinion on the medieval idea of being sent on pilgrimage as punishment? So I suppose for sins, remission of sins, or when people went to confession to be forgiven. So were they sent on a pilgrimage as a punishment or a reparation?
Right, so in front of me, you can't see it because you can't see me, but in front of me I have an example of this. It's from the Bishop of Rochester in the 14th century. And this was somebody who committed the act of adultery. We don't know what it was, just as adultery. And this is his punishment. Every year for 6 years, he was to go to St. Thomas of Canterbury, St. Thomas of Hereford, St. Edmund of Bury, and St. Richard of Chichester, plus a £3 candle annually for years on the feet of St. Andrew at Rochester, and almsgiving. That's just kind of one example. This is actually, I was going to show you this, but you can't see me. So this is Diana Webb's book on pilgrimage in the medieval West, and she has a table here of all the kind of sins that people committed and what they had to do to make reparation. It's the typical examples of fornication, clerical incompetence, clerical incontinence, slip of the tongue there, clerical incontinence, which seems to crop up quite a lot. Fornication, disturbing the peace is one as well. Slander and adultery comes up a lot. So those are just kind of examples that I just happen to have at hand. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, that would be interesting if people did that today then for those various things. I think there would be a lot of people going on pilgrimage, a lot of celebrities for a start. I'd not name names. If anybody's interested, Diana Webb is a really good expert on the medieval pilgrimage. She's written a number of books on that, so I'm sure Anne will agree on that.
And can I just say that if anybody wants any more information or want to know anything about my my other publications, do email me and I will very happily tell you whatever you'd like to know.
If you send that to us, we perhaps put it on the website or on the Facebook group or whatever. So
yeah,
to let people know more, basically. Well, thank you very much, Anne, for a fascinating talk. We've gone on quite a while, haven't we? But it was really interesting. And I think there's a real interest in pilgrimage today from Christians, from non-Christians, from all sorts of people. So I think it's becoming extremely popular and touching people in a way that organized religious faith as such doesn't seem to. Whether it's linked to the sort of new age thing, I don't really know. I don't know. Or whether it's kind of, I mean, for some people, pilgrimage is exercise and fresh air and long distance walking routes. And maybe that's fine. But the journey itself seems to be very important now, not just a destination. So that's something we can carry away from the talk this evening anyway. But just a matter of interest, the word saunter, the verb saunter, comes from Santerre, the Holy Land, because of the way people moved, and canter, the horse's canter as well, is linked with Canterbury. So it's kind of entered our language and our vocabulary, even if people don't do it. It is part of our language and vocabulary. Anyway, very interesting. Thank you very much, Anne, for your fascinating talk and information this evening. So very well done to everybody. I think we had 40 odd people in our the Zoom this evening, and I think it's going to be put on the website at some time in the near future as well. So very well done to everybody on the ECHA committee who's involved in this. It's not just a one person doing it; it's a whole team of people behind this, as always. And don't forget our AGM in London. If you're interested, do book. It's you can book it on the Eventbrite. All the information's on the website and so on. So thank you very much. And as far as I'm concerned, that's goodbye from me.